we can see here is that different regions in our brain, they serve different functions. So we can have the lateral surface of the cerebrum showing areas of functional localization here. So we have auditory memories, verbal, speech and interpretation, reading, visual, sensory combination and interpretation, proprioception, stereognosis, weight, tactile sensation, skilled movements. So there are different areas in our brain and they have different functions that they are associated with. So we have structures here and these structures have functions. So there are some specific functions, structures in the brain that are important for processing sensory information or for controlling motor function. Motor function is another word for movement. Autonomic function, that's all the things that your body automatically does, like breathing and heartbeats, emotions, sleep, cognitions. So one of the ones we will talk about is like, we'll talk about the amygdala, we'll talk about the hippocampus as well. So the structures have functions and we'll also be looking into those more. So the cerebral cortex is ultimate control and information processing center in our brains. Then we have left hemisphere and right hemisphere. And you think that they are that they do similar things so that they're symmetric, but it's not really the case. They do different things. So we have the cerebellum. So you can see this is the cerebellum here. And if we just slice the brain in half and look at one part of it, then you can see the cerebellum coordinates voluntary movement and balance. It supports learning and memories of such. So the hippocampus is one of the regions that I was studying a lot for Alzheimer's disease. Do you guys know why this could be an important region to study for Alzheimer's?
Doesn't it contain memories or something?
Yeah, and what happens, thank you, Yannick, and what happens during Alzheimer's disease?
Well, people just tend to forget a lot of things that usually they don't forget, like who they are or who they talk to.
Yeah, actually, so you guys are talking about how parts of your brain finish development when you're 25. And when we're growing, we have a lot of neurons that are being created. But actually what's interesting is that even in adult brains, we are still having formation of some neurons that is called neurogenesis. So it's neurogenesis, which is the formation of neurons. And the hippocampus is one of those regions that forms neurons. But in Alzheimer's disease, there are less neurons that are being formed. And nobody knows why this is the case. And we'll talk about some different hypotheses that people are having. And you guys could be one of those researchers who helps us make advancements in these fields in terms of understanding these diseases. Just a few years ago, it was discovered that schizophrenia is an autoimmune disease. Oh yes, there was a hand that was raised.
I want to add an information about Alzheimer.
Yes.
Any memory that's short, that happened recently, the patient that has this disease, he will not he will not know what's happening, and he will forget these recent memories. But for the past memories, that's like 10 years ago or more, he will just he will know it. And
oh, thank you, Mohanad. Yes, that is very well said. They actually did these studies on this guy. He had this concussion and he had I think he lost part of memory of part of his brain. So they actually used him for some experiments because he kept on repeating the same thing again and again. I think part of his hippocampus was sort of messed up in his brain accident that he'd had. He had some accident and part of his hippocampus was, defective. So yeah, so sometimes like short-term memories so it's all about how your brain encodes and stores information and forms connections as well. So in Alzheimer's disease, when they look at, and I think what happens is they look at these, so let me show you guys in the beginning as well. Those are the different types. So in Alzheimer's disease, what we saw here is that we have a healthy brain. This is when you slice the brain, you can see it's a healthy brain. This is a mild Alzheimer's disease, and this is severe. So there's a lot of, brain matter that's lost during diseases like Alzheimer's disease. Oh yes, Ilya?
I have a question. So in psychology, we learned that the hippocampus stores explicit memories, which are like vivid things that you remember, and then the this other place called the cerebellum stores implicit memories, which are ones like that you don't specifically remember, but like it's like riding a bike, like you just know how to do it. So does Alzheimer's also, I guess, does it like cause you to forget like implicit memories? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think what people mainly study at first, that's a very good question, Ilya. So I think what people mainly study right now is them. Actually, that's why we are studying like 3 different areas in the brain in our paper, because based on data and availability, Alzheimer's impacts so many regions of the brain, but the first regions that are usually the ones that are impacted are hippocampus. Then we also looked at the prefrontal cortex and the lateral temporal lobe. So we'll actually discuss that more as, in the course, like what does each of the different brain regions do? How are they involved as well? Like we have like in Parkinson's, we have the substantia nigra, we have like different regions of the brain that are involved in different diseases. And when they get affected, then we have different outcomes. We have problems with certain types of neurons, like motor neurons, and we'll actually discuss that, but that's really cool. A very good question. So how each of these may be impacted later on in Alzheimer's or as it progresses, and we will definitely get to that as well. And that's an area, that's a topic. But hippocampus is usually one of the most studied because it's directly linked to memory. But people have also looked at the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex as another region, lateral temporal lobe. So we will cover that though. And yes, so then those are active, research questions, like what happens to those other areas in the brain. So amygdala is like the fear, flight or fight or flight response. And there are observations that people who have personality disorders like borderline personality or others, they could have like a extremely high amygdala. So they're very emotionally reactive. So we can discuss those. I know some people who have personality disorders, and sometimes it can come from if you feel like you're walking on eggshells. What that means is that with some people you have to be very sensitive, or some people they can have huge amount of empathy, but then they also are reactive in other ways. It's all about emotions and the brains. In schizophrenia, what they found is that a lot of the people, they can feel very overwhelmed and have difficulty making certain connections, and it's a lot of synapses that are pruned. We will discuss that. But each of these brains has different functions, and but they can talk with one another as well. So tomorrow we'll also have Jonathan coming in to talk to you more about the biology aspects, because he's studying neurobiology, and he will be actually introducing those even more to you guys. So we talked about this earlier, and I think Campbell had guessed correctly the weight of the human brain. So the adult human brain weighs about 3 pounds, which is about 1,400 grams. So it's approximately the weight of a cantaloupe. So that's pretty awesome, right? That's the weight of our brain. So we have these 3 major regions of the brain, the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. And we'll discuss more. We'll have more. I'm just giving a little overview as well of the brain. So these are the 3 main regions. But so you can see that we can sort of divide the brain up into many different regions. It's sort of like how you're slicing the brain. We can sort of like group it by these skilled movements and activation, creative thought. We can label the regions of the brain. We can cut the brain up into left and right hemispheres, look at the roles on either hemisphere. We can also divide the brain up into the 3 major regions and work in that way as well. It's all about how you slice the brain. And then, of course, if we slice the brain, like if we slice it in, like if we cut like a thin slice, like think of like a thin little, like, I don't know, like a little disc, for instance, we can see this here. So what's the matter? we're going to understand like what is brain matter, for instance. So this is like along the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is, as I was showing you here, you can think of the spinal cord as, coming down from the, extending on from the brain stem and sort of being where all these, spinal nerves are all connected to this spinal cord nerve, spinal cord over here. All these spinal nerves are connected there. So that's what we can look at here. And that's what the spinal cord is. And the spinal cord has gray matter and it has this white matter here. So this is what the gray matter is here and the white matter is here. And we can see, for instance, if we look at this cut through of the brain, that this is white matter and this is gray matter. So gray matter processes and interprets information. And we'll talk about the somas right now as well. But it's mainly made of the neuron somas, which are round central cell bodies. They have all the organelles, they have all the materials. Like organelles are like what you typically associate with cells. We'll actually talk about that right now. And white matter transmits the information from the gray matter to other parts of the nervous system. So what this white matter is doing is it's taking all this information from the gray matter and it's sending it to other parts of the nervous system. And a reminder is the nervous system is basically made up of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And it's like, the brain and spinal cord. And it's how we react on stimuluses, on information that we receive. So it's made up of the central nervous system. And you can think of central, like what is the central idea we think of? It's the brain and then the spinal cord. And then the peripheral is like everything else, like our peripherals are like these digits, these fingers and toes and everything else that we forget about. When you think of neuroscience, like think of it this way, in neuroscience, you're mainly thinking about the brain. And we don't often think about like this finger that I'm using or like my feet that are tapping the floor. We don't think about that. So it's all on the periphery. Like we don't even worry about it on the periphery. It's not in our minds as much right now. So that's one way you can keep the two straight. So, so what it does is it's mainly made of axons, which are long stems that connect neurons together. And they're wrapped in a myelin sheath of protective coating. So we'll be getting back to this concept here. Okay, well, let me show this. I hope it does.
We're having some trouble hearing the audio, at least I am.
Oh, okay, let me try again.
All the major parts of your brain? I'm going to show you how, and all
Can you hear it now?
are your hands.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm so sorry for the
Stretch out your hands in front of you. See how the skin on this side of your hands is darker than on the other side? That's just like the outer layer of the brain, called the cortex, or the gray matter. The outside of the brain is darker than the inside because it's lined with neuron cell bodies. Cell bodies are also called soma. Cell bodies keep the neuron healthy and functioning. The muscles inside your hands represent the white matter of your brain. White matter is made up of neuron axons. Axons carry information from one neuron to another, but it's important to
we'll actually go over this slowly, but I thought this is still just a helpful introduction.
remember that two neurons never really touch. If you make a fist with your hands, you can form a shape that's similar to your brains. This is how human brains are able to squeeze so much gray matter cortex into the small space within your skull. Now take your hands, cross your wrists, and make the back of your hands touch each other. This will help you remember that the left hemisphere of your brain controls the right side of your body, while the right hemisphere of your brain controls the left side of your body. Look.
So guys, if you could do it along with this as well, I think this would be a very good activity if you can follow along with how they're doing it.
Closer at your hands. The area where they touch represents the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is a bundle of nerves that connect the two hemispheres of the brain and help them to communicate with each other. I like to think of it as the Golden Gate Bridge of the brain. Your wrists represent the brainstem. The brainstem sits at the very bottom of your brain. It's the most basic part of your brain and regulates important life functions like breathing, your heart rate, sleeping, eating, and more. This is also where signals from the right side of your body cross over to the left brain, and where signals from the left side of your body cross over to your right brain. Your arms represent the spinal cord. The spinal cord extends down your back. It sends and receives information from the rest of your body. Let's focus on the left hemisphere. Your front fingers represent your frontal lobe. If you remember front fingers frontal lobe, you'll be able to remember that this is the part of your brain responsible for complex and abstract thought. It sits right behind your forehead, and it's the most advanced part of your brain. The frontal lobe helps you to make plans, imagine possible futures, and helps you to control your emotions. It doesn't finish developing until your mid-20s, which is why a lot of kids and teenagers can sometimes do impulsive things. If you extend your index and middle finger, you'll see the part of your hand that represents the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe integrates all the sensory information in your body. Your sense of space, navigation, and touch all get relayed here. But your brain doesn't prioritize each part of your body equally. Take a look at this homunculus map of the primary motor cortex of the brain. You'll notice that the brain prioritizes information from your hands and face. Now,
Oh, so actually I want to explain how this works. So this is called a oh wait, oh gosh. No, okay.
want to learn
It's-
all the major
I wanted to show you the homunculus. Okay. Oh, okay, it's not going to, okay. This is the homunculus. And what this is it's showing how this is a part of your brain, and it's a part of the brain that is dedicated to sense. It's homunculus because it looks like a human in a way. Like if you see it, it almost looks like the legs, feet, hands, eyes. It looks like a human, but a very distorted human. So this is showing regions of your brain that are dedicated to having these neurons, communicate with one another. So what do you guys notice about this? Like, so it's where we have like neurons and we have a lot of sensations taking place. And these are like the folds. You can think of these as the folds in the brain, the brain is like crumpled like a piece of gum. And you can see that these are the different ridges along the brain. So that's what it's representing. Just think of this as a slice of the brain. So what do you guys notice about this? Like which regions have more neurons and more sensations? But what surprises you guys? Yes, Ilya?
There's a lot of area dedicated to the face and its features.
Yeah, and especially, what is one of our strongest muscles? Do you guys know what the strongest muscles in our body?
The tongue.
Yeah. Yeah. Alex, did you want to say something?
Me?
Mhm.
No, I'm just amazed that the tongue is the most, I had no idea. Here I was thinking it was annoying to me sometimes, but it's great. Love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Alex. That's also why, you guys are still too young, but if any of you guys have ever kissed someone before or anything like that, sometimes your tongue is extremely sensitive, or your lips are extremely sensitive. A small area, you're able, when you have that special someone that you're with, or when you're eating food, for instance, like it's extremely sensitive, and there's a lot of and that's also like what we're putting into our tongue. Half the time we're making sure we have food that we enjoy eating, that's nutritious, and hopefully, but the tongue has a lot of neurons for it as well. And you can see that you have a lot for the toes and the fingers, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And think of it like the elbow is smaller, the wrist not as much, but the hand, you can see like your thumb, you can see each of these fingers has a lot, right? It's quite a lot. Hip, maybe not as much, right? Hip is much bigger, but we still have like, not as much, right? Like the body's prioritizing certain things. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Even the arm, look at the arm, guys. The arm's not as much as like like relative to the size of the part of the body.
Primary motor cortex of the brain. You'll notice that the brain prioritizes information from your hands and face.
See?
Now look at the back of your hands. You'll notice they look like eyes. This will help you to remember the occipital lobe, the area responsible for your visual information, and how it's located in the back of your brain. Have you ever hit the back of your head and seen stars? It's because you hit your occipital lobe. Take a look at your thumb. See how it can lift away from the rest of your fist, but remain attached to your hand? That's similar to the temporal lobe. The back of the temporal lobe is connected to the parietal and occipital lobes, but the front section can be lifted away from the rest of the brain. The temporal lobe is responsible for understanding sounds and speech. Here's how I remember this. The thumb looks like a temporal lobe, which is important for talking.
See, you can sort of see that looked like a little bit of a thumb. You can see that this looks a little bit like a thumb, like, you know, like my thumb protrusion. That's sort of like the temporal lobe.
Temporal lobe, which is important for talking. If we take a closer look at the temporal lobe, we'll find the limbic system. The limbic system is responsible for emotions, learning, and memory. Inside, you'll find the amygdala, an almond-shaped structure which is located just below where your thumbnail is. The amygdala is responsible for basic emotions. Further inside your thumb is the hippocampus. It's sort of where the bone is in this part of your thumb. The hippocampus is responsible for learning and memory. That's it. Now you've got a portable model of the brain that you can take with you and use whenever you need it. Recreate it with your own hands a few times and customize your model by making your own mnemonics. What questions do you have about the brain? Let me know in the comments below.
Yeah, he said pretty good. He explains pretty well. So that's a very interactive way to understand the different parts in your brain as well.